Have you ever stopped to think about why some of the greatest stories in the world die before they reach the end? It's not for lack of talent, it's not for lack of money, it's because of pacing, because of a model that was built for a different time, a different generation, an industry that no longer exists in the same way. And that's exactly what's happening right now with One Piece. Toei Animation announced a change that split the community in two. From now on, One Piece will air in blocks, roughly 26 episodes per year released in seasons, instead of the weekly schedule everyone has known since 1999. 26 years of weekly anime, 26 years of having a new Luffy episode in your life every single week. And now, that's about to change. A lot of people's first reaction was automatic. Toei is cutting episodes. Toei wants to save money. They're going to kill the anime. But hold on, take a breath and think this through with me before you go into full panic mode, because this story has way more layers than what shows up on the surface. Let's take a step back. One Piece, under the current model, airs every week. Every single week. 52 episodes a year on paper. In practice, with breaks, specials, and filler arcs, the number varies, but the structure is the same. Weekly, continuous, uninterrupted. And that model existed for a very specific reason. Oda's manga is still being published. Here's the problem nobody likes to say out loud. An anime following an ongoing manga on a weekly basis will inevitably catch up to the manga. It's narrative physics. The anime produces content far faster than Oda can write it. Oda spends weeks building a chapter that the anime burns through in 24 minutes. The math never added up, and the solution Toei used for decades to plug that gap is called filler. Invented episodes with no basis in the manga, created purely to buy time. If you've been a One Piece fan for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Entire arcs that simply don't exist, stories that start from nowhere and end without consequence, characters who appear once and vanish. And the worst part? Episodes that take one chapter from Oda, one chapter, and stretch it across 3, 4, sometimes 5 episodes with looping flashbacks, face close-ups, and dramatic music while absolutely nothing happens. That has a name. It's called a pacing problem, and One Piece has suffered from it for years in a way that newer fans might not have felt as deeply, but veterans feel in their bones. So when Toei says 26 episodes a year in blocks, what they're really saying in practice is this: we're going to stop producing just to survive and start producing for quality. And that forces you to face an uncomfortable question. Would you rather have 52 mediocre episodes or 26 episodes that blow your mind? Because that's exactly the dilemma on the table. Think about Dragon Ball Super. Toei tried to keep the weekly pace, and what happened? The Tournament of Power arc, which had insane potential, was tainted by slideshow quality animation, scenes that looked like they were rushed out the door, visual inconsistencies that became memes, Vegeta with a giraffe neck, facial expressions that looked like pyramids. The story was good. The execution, in many moments, was a disaster. Now think about Demon Slayer. Think about Jujutsu Kaisen. Think about the final arc of Attack on Titan. All of these titles work on the seasonal model. Blocks of episodes, a break, next block, and all of them became benchmarks for animation quality in the last decade. That's not a coincidence. It's a direct consequence of the time studios have to actually work. When you give an animator room to breathe, they create art. When you put an animator on a conveyor belt that never stops, they just survive. There's an enormous difference between creating and surviving. But let's be honest about the side of this change that actually hurts. Weekly One Piece was a ritual. It was waking up Sunday morning, opening Crunchyroll, watching the new episode, and heading to Twitter to talk about it with the community. It was that feeling of having something to look forward to every single week. For a lot of people, weekly One Piece was companionship. It was consistency in a chaotic world. There was something deeply comforting in knowing that next week, no matter what happened in your life, Luffy would be there. And that's not trivial. That's real. The relationship people build with content that shows up every week is different from the relationship with something that comes in seasonal blocks. It's like the difference between calling your best friend every week versus scheduling a meetup every 6 months. Both have value, but the emotional texture is completely different. So when people react with resistance to this change, they're not being irrational. They're defending a bond. They're defending a routine that was part of their lives for years. That deserves respect, but respect doesn't mean the resistance is right. Let me tell you something that almost nobody connects when they talk about this. One Piece is in a phase that might be the most important in its entire history. Oda has stated in multiple interviews that the story is moving towards its ending. Not tomorrow, not next year, but the end, with a capital E, is coming. Egghead is over. Elbaph is happening. The conclusion of the Void Century, the revelation about the world government, the final poneglyph, the story of Rox D. Exbeck, what really happened with Shanks, all of that is coming. Now tell me something. Do you want those moments delivered with rushed animation, watered-down pacing, and a production running on fumes? Because I'll be direct, if One Piece stays on the weekly model until the end, the chances of Elbaph and the final arcs suffering from the same pacing problems as recent years are enormous. The Wano arc was incredible in many moments, but it also had episodes that stalled so badly that people on Twitter were literally counting how many seconds of actual new content the episode contained. That cannot happen with the ending of a 25-year story. There's another angle that almost nobody is talking about: the animator workers themselves. Crunchyroll, Toei, Japanese animation studios, the industry has a serious burnout problem. It's not a secret. For years, there have been discussions about the brutal working conditions, the low wages, the impossible deadlines. Animators working on weekly anime live under constant pressure that erodes mental health, creativity, and quality of life. This format change isn't just a business decision. It has real impact on real people who spend their days drawing every single frame of the anime you love. When you say, "I want weekly episodes," you're also saying, even without meaning to, "I want these people to keep working at their limit." That doesn't mean the corporations behind anime are altruistic. They're not. But the practical effect of fewer episodes with more production time includes, yes, better working conditions. And that has value.
Now let's be critically honest about the legitimate concerns on the other side. 26 episodes a year, if executed poorly, can be a different kind of nightmare. Risk number one, Toei changes the format but not the mindset. If with 26 annual episodes they still cover the same amount of manga content they were covering with 52, then quality might improve, but the pace will be so slow it'll feel like the anime is marching in place. Mathematically, Oda publishes an average of 40 to 50 chapters per year. If the anime adapts at an average of 2 chapters per episode, which would be a solid ratio, you'd get between 20 and 25 episodes covering the year's manga. That math works. But if they decide to adapt chapter by chapter, you'll get 23-minute episodes for a chapter that takes 5 minutes to read, and then the slowness comes right back through the window. Risk number two is what I call the emotional gap problem. Dragon Ball Super, for example, disappeared in 2018. It came back with the superhero film, but the anime itself went 6 years without a new episode. When a franchise stays off the radar for too long, it loses momentum. It loses the daily conversation. It loses the new generation of fans who would have connected with it through weekly episodes and simply never got there. One Piece has such an established legacy that it might weather that better than other franchises, but the risk exists. And the third risk is the simplest one. Toei might just not deliver. The new format could end up being 1 episode every 2 weeks at the same quality as before. The statements are positive. The promise is cinematic-level production. But promise and delivery are 2 very different things. We're going to have to wait and see. What do we have in terms of concrete comparison? In 2023 and 2024, Toei did something different for One Piece. The Egghead saga arrived with animation quality clearly superior to previous periods. Episodes with stunning sakuga, battle sequences that had the community absolutely ecstatic. And part of that improvement happened precisely because Toei gave more production time to certain episodes. Not necessarily breaks, but internal reorganization of priorities. That suggests Toei knows how to do it. The question is whether they will. Episode 1100 of One Piece, for example, was a celebration the entire community cheered for. That quality needs to be the standard, not the exception. And for it to become the standard, the model has to change. The non-stop weekly model makes that level of quality impossible as a baseline. It really is that simple. Let me give you a perspective that goes against the grain because I think it's important. There's a narrative that says One Piece was always fine, filler and all. It's tradition. Changing is failing. That narrative is nostalgic, but it confuses affection with quality.
You can have enormous affection for something and still recognize that it has serious problems that need to be solved. I grew up with weekly One Piece. There's a deep love in that experience for me, and that's exactly why I want the ending of this story to be worthy of what it represents. I don't want Luffy's final arc to be remembered for bad animation memes. I want it to be remembered as one of the greatest deliveries in anime history. And for that to happen, something has to change. So, coming back to the original question, are 26 episodes a year good or bad? The honest answer is, it depends on how it's executed. And I know that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's the truth. If Toei uses this new format to consistently raise the animation quality, maintain a faithful adaptation pace without inflating or cutting, and deliver episodes that honor the narrative weight of the moments ahead, then 26 excellent episodes are worth far more than 52 mediocre ones. If Toei uses this format as an excuse to do less and profit the same with the same quality as before, then the community was right to be suspicious. What I believe, based on what I saw in Egghead and what Toei has declared as their intention, is that this change has more potential to be good than bad. But potential is not a guarantee. What is a fact is that the old model was reaching its limit. There was no more pretending that 52 episodes a year with filler and watered-down pacing was sustainable for a franchise heading for the most important ending of its history. Something was going to change either way. The question is whether this change will be enough and whether it will be well executed. One Piece has 25 years of history. It survived shifts in media, cultural transformations, the rise of streaming, the death of VHS and DVD, the torrent era and the Crunchyroll era. It survived the skepticism of those who said it would never end and the fear of those who said it would end too soon. It will survive this format change too. The only question that really matters now is this. When the final chapter of One Piece is animated, years from now, whenever that may be, will you want it to have been made any which way, in a rush, or built with the care that 25 years of history deserve? But maybe the most unsettling question is a different one. What if Toei gets this new format so right that in the end, we come to the conclusion that the greatest enemy of One Piece all these years was never the filler, never the pacing, never Toei, but our own reluctance to let something we love grow?